Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, an update from Ultragenyx Angelman Syndrome Aspire trial. The trial has a name now, which is exciting. I'm Ryan Fisher, Chief Operating Officer for FAST.
And I'm Amanda Moore, CEO for the Angelman Syndrome Foundation.
And we just happen to be actually together in Washington for today's webinar. A lot of excitement for today's webinar, a lot of interest. We received a ton of questions prior. Just a reminder, you can chat your questions within the spot to enter Q&A. But we received so many pre-submitted questions that we're going to be getting to really those questions today, but we will be following up with the community. But with that, I'll have Amanda start us out to talk about our speakers and the goals for today.
Yeah, super excited to be here with you all. And thank you so much for Ultragenyx taking the time to spend answering questions from the community and telling us about exciting updates that are happening. So our goals for the day is the Ultragenyx team will share plans for Aspire, the phase 3 clinical study. The team will review what participation may include for your family. And then we're going to do our best to get your questions answered. We'll answer as many as we can in the time allowed. And any other questions that we may get, we will make sure to follow up with Ultragenyx to get those questions answered for you. So like Ryan said, feel free to put answers in the Q&A, but please provide us grace if we don't get to them, but know that we will work very hard to get those answered for you. So I'm going to stop talking because you guys don't want to hear from us, but I'm going to introduce my amazing friends that came to with us today from Ultragenyx. We have Kim Godspeed, who is the medical director, who will be doing most of the presentation today. Elizabeth Mia, who is the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy, and Amber, who is the Associate Director and Patient Enrollment Liaison. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you all and welcome you to this amazing community.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Amanda and Ryan. We're really excited to be here, and we just appreciate that you've even given us the time and space to come to you guys and talk to you about the trial. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Elizabeth, who's going to kick us off, and then I'll be back with you when we dive into the kind of nitty-gritty details of the trial here in a minute, and then we're going to round up with Amber, who is our boots on the ground, really your first point of contact at Ultragenyx. That's going to really try to help get you the resources that you need, any education, all that good stuff. So she'll have some last minute tips at the end. So I'll turn it over to Elizabeth and she'll get us started.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Kim. As Kim mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Maya, and I am part of Ultragenyx patient advocacy and patient engagement team. And I have the honor of supporting the Angelman syndrome community. In my role, I lead our partnerships with patient advocacy groups like ASF and FAST and work with parents, caregivers, and patients to really listen and learn from all of you who are the true experts in what it's like to be living with Angelman syndrome in order to help inform the decisions we make at Ultragenyx and really the resources and therapies we hope to provide in the future. And I'm really happy to be here today to expand on those partnerships. So thank you. Just to start, I want to provide you with a brief overview of our time together. We're going to do a quick introduction to Ultragenyx and some of our partnerships with the Angelman community, which have led us here today. And we really want to spend the majority of the time talking about the phase 3 clinical trial and answering the questions you have sent our way, which we really appreciate. However, first and foremost, I really want to begin by thanking ASF and FAST, echoing Kim's sentiments for this opportunity to speak with all of you and for everyone who's taken the time to join us online. We know you live extremely busy lives and that your time is precious. So on behalf of all of us at Ultragenyx and the team, thank you for your interest and those great questions that you've sent our way. So before we begin, just a few things for you guys to know. This webinar is being recorded and will be available through FAST and ASF at a later date. The webinar is intended for US audiences only. The safety and efficacy of GTX 102, our investigational therapy, have not been established, and GTX 102 has not been approved by any regulatory agency. We will share an overview of our plans for the phase 3 Aspire clinical trial, but we really do encourage you to discuss individual participation with the study sites when they are available and with your treating physician. We are not going to discuss new data from the phase 1/2 clinical study in today's webinar, but an update on the phase 1/2 clinical trial results will be given at FAST in November. So I assume many of you who have logged in today and sent us some great questions are familiar with Ultragenyx. But for those of you who aren't, Ultragenyx is a biopharmaceutical company. We were founded in 2010 by physician and scientist Dr. Emil Kakkis, who has a very rich history in drug development and regulatory approval for rare diseases specifically. And we are a global company. We have about 1,200 employees. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area of California, but we also have offices in Massachusetts, Europe, Latin America, Japan, and Canada. And we really focus on are committed to developing therapies for serious, rare, and ultra rare diseases. In order to be successful in that commitment in our mission, we believe it's important to take the time to listen, to engage, and to learn from the communities we serve in order to inform our development programs like our GTX 102 program for Angelman syndrome. So while you are going to hear from a few of us today on how we've engaged and how those engagements have shaped our clinical program, we want you to know that there is a much larger team at Ultragenyx dedicated to the program and to the Angelman syndrome community. So we hope that you will meet them more in the future, but we thank you today for this opportunity to speak with us. So just to give you a little bit of background, since our start of the Angelman syndrome program in 2022, we've had the privilege of learning from the community through multiple avenues. One of the first initiatives we started was to form a Caregiver Leadership Council, or our CLC as we call it, consisting of 10 global caregivers who were identified with the help of ASF and FAST. And this group has provided invaluable insights to us on what it means for families to be living with Angelman syndrome, areas for meaningful improvement in the lives of individuals living with Angelman, and have provided ongoing feedback to us on our development plans, our communications, and our patient and caregiver facing materials. In fact, two of the members who might be here today have actually named our upcoming trials Aspire and Aurora. So they've definitely had a lasting impact on this program, and we're really excited to have them as part of Ultragenyx. We've also had the pleasure of seeking advice from the Global Angelman Community Advisory Board, or CAB, you might have heard it called, which is an organization which is organized by ASF, FAST, and the Angelman Syndrome Alliance. And this is a group of trained caregiver advocates who have graciously shared their time and expertise to advise on our development program, who've provided insights on our endpoints and assessments. And as we think past Aspire and what's next for our Angelman program, we've also hosted smaller focus groups of caregivers to better understand the needs of the subsets of the community who are currently not qualified for our clinical trial, but what we are looking for and hoping to treat in the future. And in addition, I definitely think it would be remiss not to mention those ongoing partnerships with the leaders of ASF and FAST, who continue to take the time to partner with us on a very frequent basis, and the invaluable opportunities to attend community congresses and conferences where we continue to learn from all of you in our meaningful interactions and engagements, conversations. So for all of you listening who have taken the time to speak to us, thank you for all who have contributed to those learnings. So what have we learned from all of these engagements? We've learned that patient advocacy groups are trusted sources of information, and the community wants to hear about clinical study updates from those groups. We've learned that caregivers are interested in clinical trials, but rightfully so, have concerns around their child's participation, such as time commitments and how therapies are administered. We've learned that the community appreciates clear communications around clinical trial design, inclusion/exclusion criteria, and the responsibilities of trial participants and their families. We have understood that families want and need time to consider trial participation, and they want time to consult other trusted parties, specifically close families, their Angelman syndrome physicians, and other community members who they trust. And above all else, we've really learned that each patient, caregiver, and parent journey is unique. Which brings us here today to today's webinar. We want to help clarify on our program. We want to help answer some of the questions you have, and we want to equip you to have conversations with your families, with your treating physicians, and with those doctors and principal investigators at trial sites to see if clinical trials are something that you are considering. So with that, I will turn it over to Kim to talk more about our GTX 102 program and the Aspire clinical trial.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Elizabeth. That was such a nice overview of how we've gotten to this point. And I can tell you that our whole team is thrilled that we are here. And so the first job I have today is to introduce you to GTX 102. Then we'll go through what's in the trial, and then we'll end up again with the clinical trial resources piece. So what is GTX 102? It's an antisense oligonucleotide, so an ASO, and it's designed to activate the silenced paternal UBE3A gene. So indulge me while we go through what all that means. In an individual who does not have Angelman syndrome, it is natural and normal for them to only make UBE3A protein from the maternal copy of the gene. Now remember, everybody gets a set of chromosomes from mom and a set of chromosomes from dad. And in the brain tissue specifically, there's this imprinting process, and that is where dad's copy of UBE3A is silenced by an antisense transcript. And so that's why we only make UBE3A protein from mom. So if you have Angelman syndrome and you have a genetic defect that impacts how that mom's chromosome works, then that's when you end up with a deficiency of UBE3A. In the case of our phase 3 study, we're focused on the deletion genotype, but really this could apply to just about any genotype that you have a deficiency of UBE3A protein from mom's copy having a genetic defect. And you have dad's copy that's there as a backup, but it's silenced by that antisense transcript because of just how the body is made. So GTX 102 is our Ultragenyx's ASO, and its job is to go in and block the antisense transcript. So it's designed to block this blocker, silence the silencer, so that you aren't making GTX or aren't making UBE3A from mom's copy, but you could make it from dad's copy if that silencing is relieved. So what does that mean in terms of patients, and what could that look like for you? So what we can tell you is what we've seen in the phase 1/2 study from our observed results. Because GTX 102 is designed to be a medication that could target the underlying cause of Angelman syndrome, that means we could see potentially benefits in any number of symptoms that are due to that loss of UBE3A. So in our phase 1/2 study, we've really focused on the symptoms that we know from your community that you have told us are important symptoms from your disease concept models, all of your natural history work. We've taken all of that into consideration when we've started thinking about how do we measure improvement or measure efficacy. In the phase 1/2 clinical study, again, we're not going to dive into the details of those results here today, but we have seen some participants show improvements in cognition, so better learning and memory skills and scores, improvements in receptive communication like listening and understanding, reductions in hyperactivity or impulsivity, improvements in sleep, which we know is really impactful for your entire family and household, and then improvements in balance and coordination, which can really impact lots of different areas of life potentially. I do want to stress this is not an approved treatment. It's not an approved therapy. So it's something that we continue to have to test to measure safety and efficacy. And that's our goal for the phase 3 study, which is called Aspire. So before we dive into all the details of Aspire, just a quick drug development 101 lesson, which I know a lot of your community already knows, but indulge me again. We have our how drugs can get from the bench to the bedside. So pretty much all drugs will start in preclinical labs. So in labs with scientists where they're being tested and formulated and assessed on different cell lines or animal models, and they go through lots of rigorous safety and potential efficacy testing. And once they pass that benchmark to say, we think this is reasonably safe based on our studies, and we think there's a prospect of benefit, potentially patients could benefit from this new drug. Then it goes into clinical trials. And all the way along, we're assessing safety. But those early trials, your phase 1/2 studies, are really focused primarily on safety. And in the world of rare disease, we almost always look at efficacy alongside safety because we know that our patient populations are smaller and we need to get as much data as we can from each of these trials. So our phase 1/2 study enrolled 74 participants, and we had reasonable safety and efficacy data from that study in order to move it into the next phase, which is a phase 3 study. Now, the phase 1/2 study is open label. We'll talk a lot about what that means. And our phase 3 study is going to be a controlled study. So when you have an open label study, you get a sense of what your safety and efficacy might look like. And then you move it into the phase 3 where you enroll more patients and you control it so that you're comparing the treatment versus a control arm. We'll talk about what that control arm is here. And you get a better sense of what could be being driven by the drug versus what is just happening by chance alone. Once you have all of that completed, then all of that data gets submitted to regulators. In the US, it's the FDA, and they review all of that information and decide if they think it's an approvable drug or not. If it's approved, then it goes into market and your regular doctor can potentially prescribe it. And we continue to collect information on the safety and efficacy all the while so that we understand the long-term impacts of a drug outside of just the couple of years that we study it in clinical trials. And note, there's not any approved Angelman syndrome specific drugs right now or treatments. We know there's a lot of things that your families and your doctors can do to help make your kids feel better and treat some of the symptoms of Angelman syndrome. But here we're talking about drugs that are really specifically targeting, for example, UBE3A abnormalities. And so that's really what GTX-102 is designed to do, is target that underlying cause. So how have we studied the safety and efficacy of GTX-102? What did that drug development and clinical development look like for this program? So we had our phase 1/2 study. It has been running for the last few years. You may have heard some of our updates over time. And this was a study where we looked at it for the very first time in human patients. And we were looking at it in patients with deletion genotype, ages 4 to 17. And so that's the population we're still going to look at in our phase 3 study. It helped us understand the safety and efficacy profile of GTX-102, but now it's time to do the more rigorous controlled study so that we can confirm the findings that we saw in our phase 1/2 study. The phase 1/2 study is closed and or closing rather, and all of those participants are rolling into what we're calling our long-term extension study, or LTE. And this study opened up this summer, and we're rolling it open at a lot of different sites right now. And it's designed to capture any participants from a prior clinical trial with GTX-102. So the phase 1/2 participants are rolling into this study. Eventually, our phase 3 participants will roll into this study. And really, any other study we think that may come down the pike, we will probably roll into this long-term extension study to continue to monitor safety and efficacy over time. Our phase 3 study, we're going to go into a lot more detail than this little box. So I'll save that for upcoming slides. But our goal is to have it open by the end of this year. And I want to highlight one other study that'll be coming up, and you'll get more information shortly. But we do have another study called Aurora, and that one is a phase 2/3 study where we're measuring the safety and efficacy in the populations who were not studied in our phase 3 study. So younger kids, adults, as well as individuals with non-deletion genotypes, so mutations, uniparental disomy, and printing center defects, we're intending to be as inclusive as we think is safe. And so this study is continuing to be finalized, but our goal is to have it open at some point in 2025. Now, many of you probably know about clinicaltrials.gov, but if you don't, it's a great resource that you can get up-to-date and reliable information about our studies. The phase 1/2 study is up there, and it's listed as closed to enrollment. The long-term extension study is up there, and it's listed as invitation only. And that's only because we are only allowing patients who have been on prior GTX-102 trials to go into that study. So it's not an all-comer from every community study. It's really for prior clinical trial participants with GTX-102. And then our phase 3 study is up there. More details will be updated as we're able to share them. So stay tuned. That's a good, reliable resource for information as we go forward. So finally, what does our phase 3 study look like? It is a global study intending to enroll 120 children, and again, with deletion genotype, ages 4 to 17 years old. It's a phase 3 study, which means it's a well-controlled study, and it's designed to test the safety and efficacy of this investigational medicine and to see if the changes that we see, safety or improvement, are related to medicine alone or medicine, or could have happened just by chance. And so that means that there will be a control group. We'll talk about that here in a minute. It's designed to be a 2-year study. So within the first year of the study, we're calling that our double-blind period. That's when neither you nor the patient nor some of the investigators, and not even me, will know if you're receiving GTX-102 or if you're in the control arm. But in year 2 of the study, it's an open label period, and everybody will be treated and will know they're being treated with GTX-102. The initial study results are intended to be analyzed once everybody's completed that first year of study. And after year 2, again, all of those individuals will be able to roll into the long-term extension if they choose to. The primary objective, again, is to focus on those domains, those symptoms that we have heard from y'all are really important and impactful. So cognition, communication, motor function, sleep problems, and challenging behaviors. And you should consider participating if you meet some of these kind of key inclusion criteria. Now, we always recommend that you discuss with your families, your treating medical teams at home, as well as in detail with the sites to make sure that this is a right fit for your family and for your child. But in general, if your child is between the ages of 4 and 17, has a maternal deletion of UBE3A that's causing their Angelman syndrome, can walk independently, have not previously had a gene therapy or an ASO therapy, and agree to participate in all the clinical trial activities, you might be a good candidate. Now, a couple of notes here. For the genetic confirmation, we're just asking to review your genetic report that you have clinically that showed you that your individual child had Angelman syndrome. If we have additional questions, we can discuss those on a case-by-case basis with your site and teams, but our intent is not to do any additional testing to reconfirm your diagnosis. With regards to walking independently, we did have some initial safety concerns of lower extremity weakness. You may have heard us talk about this in previous scenarios. And so one of the ways that we're monitoring for onset of lower extremity weakness is by changes in the patient's gait or how they're walking, how they're ambulating. And so that's why we ask that they can walk at least independently for a reasonable number of steps at enrollment, so that we have a good baseline to compare and be alerted if there's a change in that. And with the gene therapy and ASO, prior exposure to ASO therapies, we don't know enough at this point about the long-term impacts or safety considerations around individuals who have received any of these other genetic type experimental treatments. And so for that reason, we don't think that it's the right time to include these individuals in a phase 3 controlled study when there's a lot of variables and unknowns around the safety. And so that's why they are still excluded from this phase 3 study. So what could participation look like? There are a plan for 3 loading doses followed by approximately quarterly infusions in the long term of receipt of GTX-102. And it is a lumbar intrathecal, that's what IT means, infusion. So this is administered by lumbar puncture, which we'll talk about in a second. There's a number of different blood, urine, and spinal fluid tests that will be completed across the life cycle of the study. Of course, physical exams and developmental testing periodically. Lots of questionnaires and surveys, which I know is everybody's favorite part of a study, but trying to understand what they look like from different perspectives of the clinician, as well as you as the caregiver in the real world, how they're doing. Some participants will have a brainwave test. We've designed this to be completed in your home rather than on site at hospitals. And it is a global study. So our team will do our best to help you find a site that's close to you, but there may be some travel involved, and we'll also help support some of that cost. So what's involved? There's a screening and randomization period where the site will go through all of the different pieces of the study. You'll complete the consent form. We'll understand if all of their labs look good, all of those kinds of things, and they will be randomized 1-to-1, like the flip of a coin, to either the treatment arm and receive GTX-102 or the control arm, where they will either receive a sham procedure or a lumbar puncture. And this participation is approximately 1 year for this double-blind period, where you won't know and the site won't know, except for the person doing the procedure and any support team that they need around them, whether the individual participant is receiving treatment or the sham control. After that year is completed, then that individual patient will roll over into the year 2 open label period, where all participants are going to receive GTX-102. If they had been in the treatment arm previously, they just continue to receive their quarterly maintenance doses. If they were in the control arm previously, then they will go through that loading period again and end up on the same dosing regimen as the treatment arm did. So saying that a little bit differently, the phase 3 study, randomization is a 1-to-1, like the flip of a coin, to receive either GTX-102 or the control during the double-blind year. And then in the open label year, everybody receives drug. And you will have all of the same assessments completed, regardless of which study arm you are on. And so the number of visits may vary a little bit in year 2, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And important to note that we will provide travel-related costs to help support you getting to all of your study visits. We know that this is a lot to ask of you as family, and that you already have a very busy life on top of this. So we understand what we're asking, and we try to support as much as we possibly can to ease that burden on you. So how's it given? I mentioned it is given during a lumbar puncture. So that is another term for that is a spinal tap. So an individual will lie on their side with their knees tucked up to their chest. The skin is cleaned, and typically they will be given some sort of sedation or medication to help them sleep. And then maybe some even local anesthetic around the skin to help ease any pain at the local insertion site. A needle is used to stick into the lower part of the back, the lumbar region of the back, to go in between the bones and get into the spinal canal space below the level at where the spinal cord ends. This is a very routine procedure that is done commonly across all major pediatric hospitals, but we understand if this is the first time your individual child is having this done, that there can be some nerves or anxiety around this procedure. But please know it is a pretty routine procedure for most neurologists and other pediatric specialists. Fluid is allowed to come out and collected, and we send that and save it for special testing, and we're collaborating with the Angelman syndrome community to further biomarker assessments and work there. And then the GTX-102 would be also infused through that same spinal needle, followed by a CSF flush to help get the drug all the way up to the brain. And we anticipate this procedure to be done approximately every 3 months in the maintenance period of the study. So how do we support your family and support your child during this? Again, most individuals with Angelman do need medication to help them relax or to sleep during the procedure so that they stay comfortable, they stay still, and they're not under a lot of distress during the procedure. We do ask that the least amount of sedation possible is used so that we aren't overly burdening them with too much anesthesia. You will not be in the room for the actual procedure when it is completed, and that's partly because we need you to not know if they were getting GTX-102 or sham in that first year. But you can be with them before and after the procedure, and we ask that you are, so that you can help keep them comfortable and provide some distractions. After the lumbar puncture, we do ask for patients to lie flat with the head of the bed down, angled down, so that their back has a little bit of time to heal, and the medicine is allowed to get up to the brain, yet letting gravity do a little bit of a favor there to help move that drug up to the brain where we want it to get. And we ask for this to last for up to about 45 minutes. We know this can be uncomfortable, or as kids are waking up from sedation, they may be grumpy or irritable. you can let them take breaks. You can also bring any kind of distracting tools that iPads, books, toys, things like that can help them relax and tolerate that kind of procedure day, which we know can be distressing. So finally, what's the sham procedure? Why do we include it? So in order to have a well-designed controlled study, you have to have a treatment group and a control group. You follow them over time and you understand if the changes that you're seeing at the time point that you're measuring, so for us, it's at about a year. Do we think those changes are due just in the treatment arm? So we see a lot of changes in the treatment arm and we don't see the same changes in the control group. That helps us know that it was the drug and not just by chance that we saw those changes. So in a conventional or a traditional clinical trial design, you may have heard of a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled study. A placebo control means that participants are given what's kind of a fake medicine. It looks like the real thing, it's administered like the real thing, but there's not active drug. Another term for this might have been like a sugar pill, where it looks like the real pill, but it's not actually active pill. But remember, GTX-102 is given by intrathecal infusion, and we decided against infusing a placebo into the CSF, into that spinal fluid space, to assess the safety and efficacy of GTX-102. So we have to use a different kind of a control group, and the other way to do that is with a sham control group. So a sham control is where you have a sham procedure or a simulated or fake procedure that looks just like the real procedure, but no treatment is given. In this study, what we're calling our sham procedure is a pinprick in the lower back, but everything else will look the same. So they will still go back to the procedure room, have some sedation. The proceduralist or investigator will make it look like they had a lumbar puncture completed, but they will just do a little pinprick of the back. And then they'll come back and do Trendelenburg and all of the things in the recovery space with you. But I mentioned it's really important for us to get cerebrospinal fluid or CSF from the untreated or the control group as well. So we have elected to pick some very key important time points in our study where we will do a true lumbar puncture. We're asking for it to just be one attempt to reduce any potential trauma from the procedure itself. And if we can collect some spinal fluid, we're going to analyze that to compare some safety assessments to our treatment arm, as well as potentially partner with the AS research community so that we can continue to work on developing CSF biomarkers that could help potentially with future clinical studies. So the sham or control arm will have a mixture. Some time points will be a sham pinprick, and other time points will be a lumbar puncture where we'll collect a small amount of CSF. So how are we measuring symptoms of Angelman syndrome? I've kind of thrown these symptom buckets up at you a couple of times now, and these are the symptoms that we have reliable ways to measure them, and we're measuring them in from different perspectives. So in green, we have the Bailey-4 developmental testing. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that test. And it's been used in your natural history studies. So we have a lot of understanding of how kids with Angelman syndrome look like on this test over time. And so that's in green, where it's a clinical evaluation of the participant, where they're performing and being assessed all at one time. Then the clinician will complete some questionnaires. Those are in pink, and those have your input as caregivers, as well as observations the clinician has of the patient when they're seeing them periodically throughout the study. So those will include assessments of motor abilities as well as sleep. And then we have caregiver questionnaires like the communication questionnaire, as well as the ABCC, the behavior questionnaire that you guys will complete as caregivers. Now, this is not all of the assessments that we're doing, but this is a snapshot of some of the key assessments that we think are some of our most important ones, but we are going to collect a lot more than just these assessments throughout the study. The first year, again, double-blind year, there are 13 visits in total. 8 of those are in-person visits and 5 are phone visits. For the in-person visits, most of them will span approximately 1 to 2 days, depending on your travel needs and kind of site preferences, and you'll coordinate that with the site, of course. And most of these are dosing days or procedure days. In year 2, there are still 13 visits, but the treatment arm only has 5, and that's because of that difference between continuing to receive quarterly doses versus the control arm, which has to go through that loading period before they get to the maintenance doses. So there are more in-person visits for the overall study for the control arm compared to the treatment arm. So the in-person visits, again, are mostly dosing or procedure visits. And in the second year of the study, they're predominantly really all dosing visits. The participants will complete developmental testing approximately every 6 months. And then questionnaires are kind of sprinkled throughout, where some visits your clinician will be completing a questionnaire, and in most visits you as the caregivers will be completing some sort of a questionnaire or survey. We've tried to spread them out as best we could because we know that those questionnaires can add up over time. And then the phone visits are mostly just checking to see how y'all are doing. So have there been any new concerns, any new adverse events or side effects that you've seen, new medical problems, updates to their medications, things like that? And then some caregivers will also complete a phone interview about their experience in the study. Some will record some videos for us of how their child is doing over time throughout the study. And then again, some will complete an in-home EEG. So some experiences may differ across different participants. So what side effects have we seen? So an important part of any clinical study is monitoring for side effects. And we call these in the context of a clinical study adverse events or AEs. Now, when you report an adverse event in a study, then the investigator has to decide, was that related to the study medicine or was it not related and it just kind of happened? And that just depends on the kind of review of all of the data that's available, and your investigator will make a clinical judgment. And then we as the sponsor can also have some conversations with them. The most common AEs that have been reported in our phase 1/2 study include things like post-lumbar puncture syndrome, seizures, infections, diarrhea, fatigue, ataxia, and fever. Some of these, again, were reported as related to study drug, while others were not. And some may just be things that an Angelman syndrome patient would encounter in their daily lives as they're growing up and being little kids. Post-lumbar puncture syndrome is one that I will call out, and we do think that that is related, of course, to the lumbar punctures from the phase 1/2 study. And those kids typically presented with nausea, vomiting, and then some signs that they may have some back pain or headache, especially a headache that's positional and gets better when they're laying down and worse when they're up. And so some kids needed to be supported with medicines for nausea, vomiting. Some kids needed some IV fluids for a period of time. I mentioned earlier the leg weakness, and this is a potential adverse event with GTX-102 that we do think is related to GTX-102 in some cases. So in some participants, we think that GTX-102 can be kind of irritating to the protective covering around the nerves in the lowest part of the spine. We saw this in our initial 5 patients who were treated with a different formulation and much higher doses with a more rapid dose escalation in those initial 5 kids. And since then, we've made quite a few changes, including adjustments to the dosing schedule, as well as adding a few other measures, including corticosteroids during the loading period, that artificial CSF fluid flush to help get the drug up to the brain, as well as the Trendelenburg positioning that helps get let gravity help us get the drug to the brain as well and away from that lumbar region. And since implementing those measures, we've seen quite a reduction in how many cases of lower extremity weakness we've seen, or leg weakness. The kids typically presented with difficulty walking, and were all recovered completely within mostly a few weeks. Some took a little bit longer, but none of them have had any recurrence of lower extremity weakness or leg weakness. Nobody has had any apparent long-term negative effects from that isolated incidents. And all but one have restarted GTX-102 and have, again, not had any recurrence after being re-challenged with GTX-102. So we think we have a pretty good handle on how to reduce the incidence of this. We know how to recognize it, we know how to manage it, and we know that we aren't seeing long-term effects based on our phase 1/2 data. So we're pretty confident that we've got a plan going forward to keep patients as safe as we can. But no, it's not us that, or not just us looking at the safety data. So Your study doctor and team will monitor for safety events and adverse events, but we also have a special monitoring committee called the Data Monitoring Committee, or the DMC, or you may have heard of it called the DSMB, Data Safety Monitoring Board. And these are individuals who are independent from Ultragenyx, independent from the trial. They're not investigators in the trial. They have no stake in the outcome of the study, and they are just there to be objective reviewers of safety data. And they help us make decisions if we have safety signals come up, and we meet with them periodically through the life cycle of the study. So I've talked at you a lot. I'm going to hand it over to Amber, and she's going to wrap us up with how you can get a little more information from our team going forward if you have questions in the future, and how her team can help you find clinical trial sites as well.
Thank you so much, Kim. So as we come to the end of our presentation, I really just wanted to take the time to introduce myself and our team and leave you with some resources. Really, Ultragenyx has this dedicated team here to just help you understand the Aspire trial. The way we do that is we can offer trial education and comprehensive resources, including trial brochures. So many of the things that Kim spoke with, we just want to give you that general study overview, along with some potential time commitments as you start to plan if this is the right decision for your child. You may also want to share with our team some basic eligibility information. So things that we also spoke to, like age and genotype. You might even want to share your location with our team so we can securely store that information and reach out to you with relevant updates. I just also want to take the time to mention, because I think it's so important, our team is a group of medical professionals, but we're really here to take each family and see them in their individual journey. So we recognize that each of you are coming to us with a different story, whether you're a new diagnosis of Angelman or you are well aware of our Aspire trial and you're learning to what those next steps look like. We want to walk alongside you in that journey and really just be that resource for you. We also recognize this can be challenging and that not every patient we connect with will be able to get referred to a trial site. So we just want to be that additional resource for you and for your family. One of the things we can also do is a site-specific coordination and offer a warm handoff to our activated trial sites. So we work closely with your family, our internal trial operations teams, to find a trial site that is accepting referrals, but that is also within your geographical region. So once we're able to identify that potential site, our team can facilitate a connection between you and that active site. The way that typically looks is, with your permission, we can share some of those basic details with the selected trial site and really hand you over with a nice warm handoff so that site has that basic information. As always, the trial site will then take over and they really determine eligibility at that point, and we step away and let that be your new resource. It's important up here on the right, we just talk about consulting your medical team. We know that together this is a big decision, and so you work alongside them to decide if this is the right decision for your child. So down here at the bottom right, you can see this is our trial recruitment team. Julie Harrell leads our team, and myself. Between the two of us, we connect with our Angelman families, so please reach out to us. As I mentioned earlier, we have an entire team that's just really here to help you. We want to serve you guys and answer the questions when we can. So down here on the bottom left, it's how to contact our team. That is our secure email address that comes to both Julie and myself, so that trial recruitment email. We've also listed out our website. Those are two different ways you can connect with both of us. So I think it goes hopefully without saying, but we are so thankful. Without you guys, none of this would be possible, right? And we all are just so excited to be here, and it's such a privilege. So thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for all that information. Obviously, a lot of questions came in prior to the webinar, and we're going to get to as many as we can. Starting with some general questions on GTX-102. We had a few questions related to, is there hope that this potential therapy will be beneficial for adults and those with non-deletion types Angelman syndrome?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And again, just thank you again for all the interest in letting us come. So we really appreciate being here in the time. So to that question, one, for adults, I think that there has been some assumptions longstanding in neurodevelopmental disorders in general that earlier is better. but I don't think that we've defined what too late is. And in our clinical trial for phase 1/2, we've not seen that age is a strong predictor of response. So we have still seen our older patients show some improvements. Now, what I can't say is that we haven't dosed any adult patients yet. So I can't definitively say that we have evidence that it would improve adult patients, but we have reason to believe that our older individuals, our teenagers, have still responded, and some of them have, of course, turned into little adults now. They're over 18. So we're gathering that information, and we have reasonable hope that there's a prospect of benefit, and we want to give them a shot. For the other genotypes, though, we don't have any reason to think that GTX-102 would act that differently in other genotypes. We really think that we can see potential benefit, and that's why we want to go and do the test. And so that's what the investigations are for, is to try to help us answer that question. But right now, our hypothesis is that adults and non-deletion individuals could all benefit, and we want to do the test to see if they do.
Great. And then a little later on, we're going to get into the Aurora study, because I know that many are interested in questions related to that. So,
yeah. So one of the questions that we get is kind of talking about like long term when it comes to our study participants. So will study participants need lifelong lumbar punctures? And if so, do we know how often they will actually need them?
Yeah, so how ASOs work is they are working for a temporary amount of time. We don't have enough long-term data to understand fully what that looks like, but by our assumptions and understandings of how ASOs work, we would anticipate this to be a long-term treatment. And our goal right now and our plan is for this to be roughly quarterly injections. As we learn more, we may make some changes there, but as of right now, that's the plan.
Wonderful.
great. Let's sort of shift a bit to Aspire and the study design itself. And we were talking about lumbar punctures. So how many lumbar punctures are needed during this trial? And really, how long do you believe the medicine lasts?
Yeah, so we do think that quarterly injections are still showing benefit in our phase 1/2 data. So that's our goal right now, is quarterly injections. Now, every time an individual gets GTX-102, that will be a lumbar puncture. In terms of the control arm, I know I mentioned that some will be lumbar punctures and some are going to be sham visits. Due to trial integrity and data integrity, it's so important that we kind of have you talk through all of those additional details at the site. And so we're trying to do our best to share as much as we can, but there are some pieces of this that we need to maintain that controlled design and the blinded status of the study. And so we do want you to have those detailed conversations, but I don't think this is the right avenue. So I would encourage everybody to ask those tough questions of your sites once they're up and you're connected with them.
Wonderful. And just for everyone that knows, we're seeing a lot of questions come into the Q&A. We're going to do our best to get to as many as possible in the time allotted, but just a reminder, we'll take whatever questions back to Ultragenyx and do our best to inform the community. But when we talk about the sham procedure, what does the sham procedure look like for the control arm? Does it require the LP, the anesthesia, all that stuff?
Yeah, great question. So for the sham arm, the control arm, they will get sedation at every one of those visits. And that's because we want everything to look as identical as we can, regardless of visit type, regardless of treatment arm or control arm. And so the other half of that, though, is that we know that these visits can be really distressing for your kids. And so when they're taken into a procedure room, we want them to be comfortable and we don't want to cause undue stress and anxiety. We also don't want to expose them to unnecessary sedation. So we're talking very closely with our sites to make sure that that sedation is being managed and monitored and minimized as much as is necessary. Now for the control arm, again, some of those visits will be sham, some will be lumbar puncture. And again, I just really encourage everybody to ask those tough questions and have really detailed conversations with the sites about what that looks like. But please know that we did our best to minimize the number of lumbar punctures that we think will be clinically meaningful. And we're really hopeful that collecting this untreated CSF can be beneficial to the community at large. we've had ongoing collaborations with FAST and ASF to develop biomarkers and work on some of this, even during our phase 1/2 study. And we're looking forward to continuing that partnership with y'all as we have this opportunity to collect really valuable fluid that could really help us in the future.
Wonderful, thank you.
Great. So, you've talked a lot about ways to, maintain what's called the blind. I think do a little education on what that means, but what measures are being put in place to keep the blind. And you touched a little bit on it, but I think it's worth expanding or solidifying also from the perspective of the family's role in keeping that blind.
Yeah, that's really great. Thanks, Ryan. It's complicated, and I will admit this is a complicated study to participate in. We're really excited to have these conversations early so that your juices can start flowing and you can start thinking about what this could look like for you. Because we want to understand what's due to GTX-102 versus what could have just happened by chance, by natural history in Angelman, we want to have a treatment group that we can follow over time and then a control group that we follow over time. And then you get to compare. What happened in the treatment group? What happened in the control group? What are the differences and how do we interpret those differences? And so that's why it's really important to maintain those kind of both arms looking very similar, both groups look as similar as possible. So all the assessment time points, the visit time points, as much of it as we possibly can will look identical between both the control arm and the treatment arm. That also means that we have lots of staff on sites and lots of staff internally that help us maintain those kind of firewalls, separation of church and state, if you will, to think about it as another analogy, so that you have a blinded team who doesn't know what's happening in the study, if they're getting treatment or not, and they're giving their objective, unbiased opinion on do they see improvements or not. Because we know that even just participating in a clinical trial, knowing that you're getting a treatment can impact how you view your world and can impact positively, potentially negatively also, but it can have an impact nonetheless. And we want to have as pure of an answer at the end of this as we can. So there's a blinded team doing the outcome assessments. And so all of those clinical questionnaires, how's the patient sleeping? How are they walking around? All of that kind of stuff. And then from your perspective, how are they communicating? What's the behavior look like at home? What does sleep look like at home? All of that is the kind of stuff that we want to make sure we protect as much as we possibly can. The unblinded team, so the team that is doing the procedure, will know. They will know if you're getting treatment. They will know if you're doing a sham visit or a lumbar puncture that day because they're the ones doing it. But that's a team that has a very specific job and a very specific role to do the procedure and then monitor some of the safety pieces that come up. And they're separate from the people who are doing the outcome assessments. So hopefully that clears it a little bit, but it's complicated. And please know there is no dumb question or simple question here. We get asked questions every day by sites and we're like, we hadn't thought of that. So if you come up with stuff, please don't hesitate to ask or float it, and we're happy to think about it too.
And can you just clarify on when the family will know when the unblinded period is? In other words, when they will be unblinded?
Yeah, great question. So at the end of the first year, there's roughly a 2-month period of time in which you'll be updated and they'll let you know which arm you were in and kind of give you the visit schedule that will be coming up for year 2. We know that's a critically important time to be able to plan and understand what your visit obligations are going to be for that second year. And so it's at some point in that window of time between your final visit in the double blind period and your first visit in the open label period.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. So a lot of questions obviously around the excitement are around trial enrollment, when that's going to begin, site location. So can you talk a little bit about when the trial will begin enrollment and when you'll share the site locations for that?
Yeah, I know. I wish we had all that information today. That would make life so much simpler. But we're still in the process of getting everything finalized and ready to share. Our goal is to have this up and running by the end of this year, but it's going to be on a rolling basis with sites. So each site is unique in the processes, the contracting, the budgeting, the startup, all of that is a complex process. And so it takes time, and that time can be variable from site to site, country to country. And so as sites become activated and are open for enrollment and are ready to receive your patients, they will go up and be on our clinicaltrials.gov. That's our plan right now. And so if you want to stay on a list or stay in communication with us, Amber and her team is really your best one-stop point of contact to get up-to-date information from us. And then clinicaltrials.gov is, of course, another place where you can get some up-to-date, reliable information.
Yeah, I think it's important because you said the word list. Let's clarify something about lists. So there are questions about how do I ensure my child is on a list to participate? Can you just clarify about how these things work related to it's when you're actually talking to your physician and the site itself?
Yeah. So Ultragenyx has no control really over who gets enrolled and who's enrolled where. And we don't even really have much control, really none, over when sites get activated. We provide as much support as we can to get sites up and running and have everything they need as quickly and efficiently as possible. But ultimately, it is up to the site investigator to determine if your child's a good candidate or not. If they think they're going to pose undue risk to your child, they may say this isn't the right time. And so those are very individualized, important conversations for you as a family to have with your medical team that knows you well, but also with the team at the site who understands the trial really well. And so that needs to be a really close conversation and communication. What our team can do is help hand you off to some of those sites that are close to your location where you live. And beyond that, we don't really have any control over it beyond, beyond y'all talking to the sites themselves. So we really want you to have those good conversations with the sites.
Okay, and just to follow up, do you have to be in a natural history study to join? Or if you were in a natural history study, how does that impact?
Yeah,
enrollment?
you do not have to have been in the natural history study. So that has no impact at all. If you were in the natural history study, we do ask that you pause your participation. So we have some of the same assessment tools in our clinical trial as you do in the natural history study, especially the Bailey, right? We know that your kids don't like doing the Bailey. They get frustrated. They may throw the book around. They may sit on the floor and say, I'm not doing any more of this. So we want them to be at their best when they're doing that developmental test. And part of that means not doing it more than absolutely necessary for the trial. And so that's the reason behind us asking you to pause your participation in the natural history study. It's totally fine if the study has some ideas of how you could stay connected with them or continue to give updates, but we really ask that they don't do additional Bailey assessments when you're in the clinical trial too. That's our big sticking point.
I think it's also important to add that you talked about Ultragenyx not having, Ultragenyx.
We can see you, Amanda, it's fine. I can see you and hear you.
Ultragenyx not having like the decision when it comes to the trial. I think it's also important to point out that neither do advocacy organizations. Like, this really comes down to the PI at each location. So I think that's important to point out.
Yes.
So I think we want to get a little bit to the Aurora trial.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of interest, of course, and first and foremost, people are wondering when will it begin? And I know those are hard questions, but we'd like you to address that.
Yeah. So our goal is in 2025. Ultragenyx always goes as fast as we possibly can. So I can't give you more details than that, but our commitment is to have it open in 2025, and we will get it open as soon as we absolutely can.
Okay.
And can you reiterate or remind everyone what genotypes will be studied?
Yeah, so again, we're intending to be inclusive of genotypes. Now that means that, some of these that have more complex genotypes, we may need to take into some additional consideration and think about. But in general, those who have some sort of a sequence variant or mutation, that includes all different types. That I don't want to get too exhaustive and worry folks, but really we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. But that also means our kids with UPD and ICD, we are intending to include. We are also intending to include a few kids with mosaicism if they have an interest, and so we'll consider those as well.
Great. And ages studied?
Yeah, so younger than 4 through adulthood. And So we'll share all of those details once they're kind of finalized and firmed up. But our plan right now is to go younger than 4 and into adults. But I don't want to make any promises before we've got good alignment with all the powers that be that say we can do different studies.
So when we're talking about that actual trial, will it be a phase 1-2 trial, or will it just go right into phase 3?
Yeah, so we've actually designed it to be a little different. So it's intended to be a phase 2-3. So we're kind of splitting the difference between the two. So our primary efficacy or primary endpoint or primary objective of that study is to look at safety, because we've never treated these populations before, right? We've never taken little kids through GTX-102, and we haven't treated non-deletions, and we haven't loaded or treated, initiated treatment in adults before. And so the primary goal is safety and understanding, what are the adverse events that we see in these new populations, but we're going to use a lot of the similar efficacy measures. And our hope that is alongside our phase 3 study, we'll have enough data to help support that this really does work and it has a good safety profile across all of Angelman syndrome.
And you don't have a number that you have for that study in your thoughts, or did you mention a number of people?
We haven't finalized a number for that yet. It'll probably be a smaller study than our phase 3, but we haven't finalized that yet.
Great. I do want to clarify a question that came about eligibility criteria for Aspire, where ability to walk independently, but your website says can walk independently with an assistant device. Can you clarify the eligibility?
Yeah. So thank you. We were just trying to be a little more simple and parsimonious on the slides. But again, those discussions will go to your sites and they will make the determination on what they consider to be sufficiently ambulatory. Our real intent is that, any child whose predominant means of, locomotion is in a wheelchair would not be a good candidate for this particular phase of the study. That may change with our other studies. So just know that this study is just being controlled a little bit more tightly to keep the data as clean as possible and so that we can interpret it as best we can. And so assistance with ambulation is okay, and those determinations will be made by the site investigators.
So when we're talking about Aurora sites, are they going to be the same as the phase 3 sites, or are there additional states and countries you're considering?
Yeah, so there will be some that are the same, but we are intending to go to places that we haven't been before. We're in the process of talking to different countries, different potential sites right now, and so more information will be forthcoming. But we're in the process of gathering, understanding of where all of our patients with Angelman syndrome are, and also where are really important sites, investigators, physicians who understand this disorder. We want to make sure you're in good hands in a clinical trial.
Great. I know we're a little bit over, but I know so many that participated in a prior ASO study, and you did mention this. If they participated in an AS study, such as Roche, they would not be eligible for this study. Is that correct?
Correct. So for the Aspire phase 3, again, we don't fully understand the safety implications or the long-term effects of ASOs or gene therapies, if that comes up the pike. And so for that reason, they are not included in the Aspire study. We don't have a planned trial for those patients right now, but we hear you and see you and understand that that is something that is of interest, and it's something that we're continuing to talk about, and what's the safest and best way to consider that.
Okay, great. I know we're over time. A lot of great questions came in. I know that we couldn't get to them. We're going to be logging those questions and sending them on to the team at Ultragenyx to provide some feedback for folks. But we want to thank you. This was the first joint webinar that we had, and we're excited to be talking about a phase 3. It's really good momentum, and we're grateful for this forum, and we're going to continue to invite you back for forums like this. We have the FAST event coming up in Florida where you'll be presenting. So we ask folks register, come virtually or in person, but you'll be giving another presentation then. But any other closing
Yeah, we will be, both organizations will work to get the webinar and the FAQ documents online and up for you guys to be able to rewatch or watch if you haven't been able to. So we'll get those out here in the next few days. But thank you guys so much for your time and for your work in our community. We always say anyone that's willing to come and do what they can to improve the quality of life of our loved ones, we will welcome with open arms. So we're thankful for what you guys are doing.
Absolutely. Thank
Well,
you,
we're
everybody.
grateful for the opportunity. It's an honor and a privilege, truly, to be, partnering with y'all. I was a physician in clinic taking care of kids with Angelman syndrome before I came over to this side, and I can't tell you how excited I am that there's options potentially coming. So thank you for the time. Thank you for the opportunity, and we look forward to continued partnership and getting to know each and every one of you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Take care.